Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Authors on Mission podcast, the podcast committed to delving into top-tier insights and strategies employed by experts to achieve success and writing a book about it. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission, and I am so excited to welcome Barbara Ann Mojica, an accomplished educator with over 40 years of experience and the creative force behind the Little Miss History series. After dedicating decades to education, Barbara now focuses on writing engaging nonfiction history books that entertain, that educate, and that inspire our future leaders. I'm excited to dive in and learn a little bit more about the process of this book and all the messages behind it. So, without further ado, Barbara, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Danielle, and it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to share with your readers and writers.
Yeah, of course. Well, and also as somebody who is an educator as well, I wanted to, say like a little high five virtually there, right? We're in the same boat with teaching the young ones. I never did a history per se, but I do know what it's like to be in there. And I'm glad that you were extending it now by putting your knowledge into a book. It's something really cool. Yeah, I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of backstory here. What led you to starting the Little Miss History series?
Well, I retired after a career of 40 years in education, and my educational career had a lot of twists and turns along the way. I started out in general ed, and for a long time I taught in a private school, and I met students from many different backgrounds with many different needs and many different learning styles. And as time went on, I became aware that we really weren't giving each child what that individual child needed to learn best. So I took a turn, and I had a friend who had recently gone into special education. And I asked her about that. She was involved in a special program to train people who had already taught, but who wanted to divert into special ed. And I did that. So I went back to school, got recertified, and started working with children at the opposite end of the spectrum, children with really intense needs, whether they be physical, emotional, or cognitive needs. So I started teaching children in a special ed preschool this time. And as time went on, there was a vacancy, and the director of the school asked me if I would be interested in becoming the director or the principal of the school. So I was interested in that, and I went back to school a third time to get a degree in administration. So then I became not only a teacher, but on the other end, I became responsible for developing the curriculum, the programming, and working with a really diverse staff of supplementary providers. So we had speech therapists, we had physical therapists, we had occupational therapists, we had psychologists. And all of us worked together to get each child what that child needed. So I did that for a while, and then another opportunity became available to become an administrator with the Board of Education, and in this case it was in New York City. So now I became responsible for finding the programs that best suited each child's needs. So I was evaluating them and then securing their placement in a school that would give them exactly what they needed. So I kind of went around, and I did that for quite a few years, and I also worked one-on-one with children. So I took more individual training so that I could do things like applied behavioral analysis for autistic children and Wilson reading program for children who needed special work in reading disabilities. So I was able to accrue a lot of knowledge in a lot of different aspects, which all led me to, again, my original goal to find how each child best learns and to give them exactly what they needed in order to accomplish that.
Understood. Well, first off, it's an incredible journey you've taken going from, different areas in education and, really just building from there every part of this journey, right? Like I mentioned before, I'm a teacher too, so I know what it's like transitioning from one topic to the other, to special ed, general ed, to history. So that in itself is, a huge feat. Now, that being said, I would love to kind of, transition now into a little bit more about the book itself also. For example, I was looking through it a bit, and, my student lease does appear to be on Alaska. So what drew you to this particular location for the Little Miss History series?
Why do I choose this location? Well, I choose locations that I think will be of interest to children for different reasons. Some of them are iconic locations that would be familiar to people all over the world, like the Statue of Liberty,
Right.
Ellis Island, Mount Rushmore. Others are more multidisciplinary, and while they are important in our history, they also appeal to other aspects that I feel kids are interested in and that are important to know about. So they might be something like Sequoia National Park, where it's more science oriented. We talk about how the seeds of the trees grow. We talk about the differences between redwood trees, sequoia trees. We talk about the animals that live in the park. We talk about the opportunities for recreation and broadening our sports interest or our individual nature interest in the book. And all of the books are developed with a focus on extending a child's critical thinking skills, teaching them the questions of who, what, when, where, why, how. A lot of that I feel is missing in our schools today. In fact, history is not taught as a separate subject in most elementary schools today. It's only when the child gets to late middle school or high school that history is introduced. And then it's tangentially introduced more as a social studies subject than history. And history is one of the best disciplines to teach critical thinking, because what are we doing in history? We're trying to understand if something is true, first of all. And then if it's true, we can delve into analyzing it, comparing it with other things, inferring other information from those facts, and then communicating that knowledge. So you need to first get that critical thinking piece. And I think that's so important to learning and so much missing from our public schools, at least today, because we've gotten to the point where we're teaching to the test. And I know when I was working in New York City schools, the teachers would spend a good 9 to 12 weeks just preparing for the math test and preparing for the reading test. And that took critical time away from kids learning. So what has happened, we've gone from, I'm talking about United States education now, we've gone from being right up there, number one, among world leaders in education, to number 40, and we're still falling. So there's definitely something wrong, and I think that became very much apparent when we had the COVID crisis and our kids were out of school for so long, so many parents became aware that their kids weren't learning what they thought they were learning. They were upset about what they learned and they were upset about what they didn't learn. And a lot of parents began to take control, and I think that's so important because parents are our first teachers. They are the ones who lay the groundwork for what is going to happen later in schools. And parents started to feel that they needed more options. So we had a flourishing of homeschools. We had a flourishing of community schools and micro schools and more charter schools and more possibilities, again, to meet what each child would succeed the best with, what type of education is going to accelerate their ability to learn. So COVID was awful, but if there's one good thing that came out of it, I think the awareness of what was happening in education was a very important point that, that came out of it.
I understand now, like, all these books are really meant to, help improve that then, if I understand correctly, because, you're saying about how the system's been going downhill, and I understand that too. I mean, I've seen it also. So it's really good to know that the Little Miss History series is kind of the first step in preparing, everybody for that. I mean, that being said, of course, parents and children, they're reading these books together, hopefully. So what would you recommend to a parent who, wants to use your book to help their children become a critical thinker? As you mentioned before, that's such an important thing. What kind of tips would you offer to anybody listening today?
Well, I encourage the parents or possibly the grandparents, because grandparents are a large part of my audience as far as the people who buy the books, largely parents and grandparents and teachers, of course, as well. How I encourage them to use it? Well, Little Miss History is a character that I hope many children can identify with, because the character was designed by my illustrator, who is also my husband, to be she's a version of my younger self. So he is an artist and who has many years of experience in doing children's books, but also in doing comic strips and comic characters. So he made Little Miss History a comical character who is funny and quirky, and I think a lot of kids can see something of themselves in her. She wears rose-colored glasses because she has an optimistic outlook on the world. She wears this kind of hiking camper outfit, reminiscent of maybe like a park ranger. I used to love to hike, and I was a great adventurer who would travel almost anywhere you invited me. She wears these oversized hiking boots, and they're in memory of my father's big feet, which were huge. She always has this kind of insatiable curiosity, and I think that's one thing that parents have to develop in kids. I call these kinds of skills creative life skills that probably come before the critical thinking skills, and you can start doing these things when your children are even toddlers or preschoolers. Teaching them things like always ask those open-ended questions. Be curious about everything. When you take your child out on a walk in the community, find something interesting and say, oh, look at that. Who do you think lives there? What do you think they lived there long ago or today? Do you think they wear the same kind of clothes we do? Do you think they eat the same kind of food? Do you think that maybe they learned like we do, or was their school different? Teaching them things like always being honest and not trying to cloud situations that may be uncomfortable. You know, when you make a mistake, parents should be willing to admit that they made a mistake to a child. Teaching them it's okay to make mistakes, teaching them to be kind to other people, whether they're the same as you or very different from you, teaching them to be generous and to share with others, and at the same time to be grateful for what they have, teaching them that it's not always good to have the most of everything, that sometimes it's good to have to work for some of the things that we want or need. And teaching them, that kind of humility and the ability to forgive other people. We all make mistakes, and sometimes we're wrong, and sometimes we might speak too quickly. It's okay, but we should forgive those who maybe don't understand us, and be willing to do the same. And I think above all, we have to teach them perseverance, to always be persistent, to keep trying, and never accept anything as any kind of failure as something negative as part of our personality, but just something that we have to try to do better with. And when you build on those basic skills, then you can start to teach kids about being leaders, being independent thinkers, being responsible for their own. It's very important from a young age to teach kids that they have certain responsibilities, even if they're simple chores, like picking up their clothes or putting their toys away. All of that you can work into teaching them to be more organized, and parents can set an example, of course, with that. And they can also admit when things don't work out for them. Oh, I should have organized that better. I should have planned better. And delegating little responsibilities and chores to them helps to build up that sense of responsibility. So Little Miss History kind of embodies a lot of those things in the book, whether she's teaching them about ancient history, going to La Brea tar pits and talking about the ancient fossils that were trapped in these tar pits, or whether she's going on a military history adventure, like in the book about the battleship Iowa, or the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. The Intrepid is a good example of a multidisciplinary book, because we have on the Intrepid World War I planes, we have World War II planes, we have the history and the movies of what it was like when the soldiers were fighting during World War II. We have they have an explorium, which allows children to do hands-on exploring, so you can climb into a helicopter that was used during the Vietnam War. You can see the space capsule. You can touch it. You can feel it. You can go on the deck and you can see the model of the space shuttle, the Enterprise, and children can visualize exactly what that trip in space would have been like. So I want them to use all of their senses, to use, how, and of course they're going to have preferences into how they learn, but there's a good example of a place where you can touch, you can see, you can hear, you can visualize exactly how that experience was. So that's what Little Miss History does. She brings them in, and the way the books are set up, with the exception of the North Pole book, we've been to the sites. So the photography, the books are what I would call multimedia. The photography comes from our own pictures,
Wow.
combined with the illustrators' hand-drawn illustrations. So there could be portraits, there could be maps, There could be other kinds of visual displays, like comparing the different sizes of the trees, or looking at the different animals. Sometimes there are museums, and in the museums, again, like in Independence Hall, you have the Museum of the American Revolution. Children can look at the rifles that were used. They can also touch them and hold them. They can experience the diorama and feel like it would have been to be on a street when these protests were happening before the Civil War. They can see what the Native Americans looked like. They can see what the costumes were, what the customs were. It's all again multidisciplinary, multi-field. All of it put together is providing that kind of experience that I want to draw them into.
Understood. And thank you for sharing all that. I can see exactly how, every book really does have a lot of meaning behind it, and, touches upon all these different elements. Really cool that the pictures are your own as well. That's kind of the next question I was going to actually ask you, because, I looked at it myself, and, there's some beautiful artwork in there, beautiful pictures. I guess I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of creating these images. I know you mentioned your husband helped to design the characters, and of course there's also a mix of some historical paintings from what I see, and then also just overlaid with the character and the text. So could you walk us through the process of how you created this book?
Okay, well, how we create any book, it's basically the same process. First, first we visit the site. Then I will take what I learned from the visit and go into historical research about the topic. I don't work from an outline. I basically gather from the visit the ideas that I think are most important that I want to put together. So then I will start writing a rough draft. And after I write the rough draft comes one of the harder parts. It's revise.
Of course.
Because as you know, with a children's book, and this is basically a picture book format, although they are not picture books in the sense that they're appropriate for very young children. They generally, my audience range is kindergarten to grade 6. So I revise it into what is a good picture book length as far as text length.
Right.
So the length of most of the books will hit around between 600 and 750 actual words. So after I've rewritten it probably about 10 times, 12 times, I will then check to make sure that it's age appropriate. So I'll take the text and I'll put it through different readers to see what age it's hitting as far as child development. And last step, once I think the text is the way I want it, I hand it to my husband, the illustrator. Now here's where it sometimes gets very interesting, because sometimes the way I envision the flow doesn't jive with the way artistically he sees he needs to present that idea. So what he does is he will first look at the text and he'll create thumbnails, sketches basically, black and white sketches, little, almost like a cartoon type of thumbnail, and he'll lay out the book. sometimes we'll run into a problem, and the way he sees that it has to be visually presented doesn't exactly jive with the way I have the text layout. I may have to rework a little bit and revise the order, or change the wording to fit the visual response is going to match with the text. So when we get through with that, and in some books it's easier than others, sometimes the flow and the visual works out very easily, and sometimes we'll have a couple of bumps and we'll have to redo it. Once we agree on the visual and the text coinciding, he starts to do the layout. So he will determine what a page needs. Does it need a map? Does it need a portrait of somebody really important that was mentioned in that text and needs to be shown? Does it need an actual photograph? So sometimes we can't get a photograph of something that we need. For instance, with the Alaska book, my most recent book, we needed to show the Russian fur traders and explorers, and we couldn't find a picture displayed in any of the museums or anywhere online that showed that. So what he did was he found a picture that could be reproduced with permission in the public domain, and we used that picture to show the fur traders and explorers. On the other hand, we were able to show a lot of information about the native tribes by photographing in Ketchikan or in the Totem Village. We were able to take actual pictures of that. We were actually able to go to the site where the transfer of land from Russia to the United States took place. So, and some museums, we were able to get pictures of the actual native costumes. And on one of the places that we visit, we go to Huna, the icy strait part of the story, where the natives actually own the island. And we were able to take pictures of natives who were able to take pictures of the way that island is structured, and how tourists are able to go and visit and actually see where these people live, this native tribe that actually owns the island. So it's a combination of techniques depending on what's needed. And final step is for him to put all those final pages together and to insert Little Miss History where he feels her presence is needed to reinforce the message, or where I have her asking a question or asking the opinion of the reader. So in a lot of my books, I ask opinions of the reader. In Mount Rushmore, we're talking about the Mount Rushmore Memorial. We're also asking them about the Crazy Horse Memorial, which the Lakota Sioux, whose land was taken for Mount Rushmore, are building their own monument to Crazy Horse, their leader. So we ask, should we have one monument? Should we have two? What do you think about Native American rights? We talk a little bit about the UN and how they're working to protect indigenous rights. Other books, we talk about things like the environment. In Sequoia National Park, we talk about these beautiful trees, and then we talk about how it's the most polluted national park. and how sometimes it's unhealthy to breathe the air there because of the industrial San Joaquin Valley and the pollution that takes place in the valley. And sometimes workers in the park have to understand that it's unhealthy to breathe the air there. So we point out the contrast. We point out problems. We usually ask the reader if they can come up with their own solutions to some of these problems. Again, trying to extend the critical thinking piece. And a lot of parents or teachers also use the books as jump starts before they go to visit one of these places, to give kids a context of what to look for and why what they're going to be seeing is so important.
Thank you for walking me through that whole process. It's very fascinating to know that it goes through so many different ends of revisions, and then, of course, sending it back and forth with your husband to draw the visuals. I love how you describe, the way you think about doing that, right? And how you have to go back and forth a little bit in order to make sure that each page is perfect for the message that needs to get, across to the reader. I think you offered a lot of really valuable tips to the listeners today who might also be, trying to design their own pages and all of that. You need to be prepared for those revisions. So, thank you for sharing that.
It's something that kids don't like to hear a lot when I talk to them about the writing process, and they say, well, how do you put this together? And I say, revise, revise, revise. Could be 10 or 12 times. They're like, oh.
Yeah, you have to be prepared for it. It's a given, especially because, you want to make sure that your book is as perfect as it can be. The way to do that is to, like you said, revise, revise, revise. So it makes a lot of sense. That being said, I'm wondering, as we start to wrap up today, do you have any other bits of advice that you'd like to offer to aspiring children's book writers like yourself?
Well, I think number one is you have to have a real passion for what you're writing about. And, there's a lot of, especially with AI out there now, oh, you can write a book in 2 days, write a book in a weekend, develop your own book series. If you're in it to make money and you're really not interested in what you're writing about, you're not going to have very much fun doing it, and you're not going to have very much success doing it either. You really have to have the passion. So that's one piece of advice. The second piece of advice I have is you have to be persistent and you have to be willing to persevere, because it takes an awful lot of time. Not only does it take a time to write the book, but that's just the beginning when you write the book. Then you have to go through all of the other processes, marketing the book, understanding how to find the right keywords so that people are going to find your book, knowing how to be able to succinctly develop a blurb that's going to attract the attention of the reader, give them the idea of exactly what your book is about in a couple of sentences. Learning how to write a bio, learning how to write a press release or a short letter, learning how to find a publisher if you're not lucky like I am, because my husband had so many years experience not only doing the art but writing and developing his own comic book series. He has a small publishing company that he owns, so we don't have that issue, but many authors have to find a publisher, and that's a big issue too, because there are so many scams out there. You have to develop a network of fellow authors. That's something that's so important for authors to realize. You can't work alone in a vacuum. You should develop a network of authors in a similar niche You may be able to develop a beta group where you read each other's work initially and give each other suggestions, but just to have that support to help each other along the way. Authors are really your best friends. They're not your competitors. They're really, they can really be a group of strong support. So perseverance, persistence, um, patience, because everything takes a long time, especially the marketing. For me, the marketing was very difficult because I had no background in selling, and just learning how to use as many tools as I could without going into that kind of hard sell thing, which is kind of antithetical to me. Just learning how to use effective keywords that got my message across, and being able to use social media to get the word out to readers. And in addition to in-person events, children's books are great if you can get in-person events. And again, fellow authors can help you to find them. Look for bloggers who write in your genre, look for fellow authors, and see what kind of events they go to. Children's books are great. If you can get a children's book festival, is a wonderful way to meet fellow authors, to meet your readers, and to meet your fans, the children themselves, hopefully, who go to these events. And that's a great way of networking too. So I would urge all authors to use fellow authors in their genre to reach out for support in your writing, for support in finding events, for support in helping you to avoid the pitfalls and the scams of people out there who are looking to make a quick buck, and just to be a support for you along the way.
Thank you for sharing all of that. All of those are very practical, very useful, and very relevant tips. So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think the biggest one, of course, is the community aspect. I say it all the time on this show, you need to have somebody there with you by your side. Writing is not solitary, it's you need someone to bounce ideas off of, to collaborate with. For you, you're fortunate enough to have not only your husband, but, you mentioned a group of people too. So, all in all of those tips are very useful to everybody listening today. I hope that you can also implement that in your writing, because every little tip counts. Everything that we can do to better ourselves and better our writing is only going to lead for a much more well-rounded and perfect manuscript. So thank you again for sharing that.
And keep trying,
Yeah.
When you fall down, you got to just pick yourself up and try again.
Definitely. Well, I'm wondering now, you've written this series. I'm wondering also, what's next for you? Are you still working on the series, for example? Should we expect even more books out on the market soon?
I am still working on the series. I have a couple of manuscripts pretty much ready to go, and also a couple of ideas for places to go in the future. I have other projects in the fire. I try to provide tips and strategies for parents and teachers in different ways, not only with the books. So especially during COVID, when we were so isolated, I developed other avenues to do that. I've been blogging for almost as long as I've been writing the books. So I have a blog where I do book reviews, and I review books that are family friendly. I also, on the blog, have tips for authors, tips for parents, and tips and strategies for teachers to use. I have a YouTube channel. On the YouTube channel, I share videos that are appropriate for children and adults. So some of them are about critical thinking, some of them are about history. I do a 2-minute teacher every week where I do little mini lessons that parents and teachers can use to supplement learning in all different subjects, not just history. And that's a very active place to get visuals if you're looking for that. I also have a very active Pinterest board. So whenever I find resources that are helpful, I put them on my Pinterest board. So that could be curriculum, that could be finances, that could be author tips, that could be home tips, that could be travel tips. I have zillions of different boards. So if you're a Pinterest person and you're looking for information, you can get the information there. So in addition to my social media, I use all of that as well. And all of that is linked together on one site. So my website, littlemisshistory.com, not only has the books and reviews and talking about the blog. I have a link to my blog. I have a link to the YouTube so you can find the videos, and my social medias or post Pinterest board. So you can go to the website and click on any one of those links. They're all clickable to go directly to the site if you're looking for that information. And there's an email on there too, which is also an instant chat. So it's pretty easy for anyone to get in touch with me. If I can help with what you're looking for, I will be glad to do that.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for opening your doors to our listeners today, because I think if they're listening to this podcast, they already heard amazing insights from you, but the knowledge doesn't stop there. So again, listeners, go ahead and click on those links. We're going to have some of them in the description box of this podcast as well, and make it nice and easy for you. And please check out Little Miss History and littlemisshistory.com for more of that information. Barbara, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. You just have so much knowledge and a passion for history and a passion for helping others. It's inspiring and admirable. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. I always enjoy sharing with authors, with parents, with teachers, with the world, my little bit of knowledge to hopefully make things easier for someone.
Yeah, definitely. I think that everything today made it amazing tips for anybody else trying to get into the, children's book realm. Lots of things to consider and think about. So, yeah, everybody today, take that to heart, apply it to your own practices, and again, check out Barbara's resources for us. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep writing, and remember that you too can make history by sharing your unique expertise with the world. Without further ado, that's the end of today's episode. And Barbara, have an amazing day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.